Today is a big day because, as you know, Nissan has just unveiled the Nissan Z Proto concept. And in this video, we're gonna go over the design, I'm gonna let you know what I think about it, and talk about the big square in the room. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is TheSketchMonkey here. Whenever a car drops that is so important, and a car that I've been looking forward to so much, like the Z Proto concept here, which to me is a 400Z. This is pretty much what the next Z will look like, and I'm gonna talk more about that later in this video. But whenever a car drops that is so important, the first thing I do is to not look at comments or read articles before I make up my own mind about what I think about this design. The moment I saw this design, I wrote down a few notes that we're going to go over in detail in this video. Because perception, when you think about it, perception is a funny thing. What I try to capture is that literal first second of seeing a new car design. What feeling does it give me, and what struck me as beautiful, and what doesn't really make sense aesthetically. After that second, that first impression is gone, and your mind starts to automatically, whether you like it or not, compare it to what's stored deep in the back of your mind, tainting that first and only pure impression you will ever have. That's why it's so important to immediately write down my thoughts before they get infected with outside or inside opinions. And those are the thoughts that I'm going to share with you in a minute here. The first thoughts or the first impressions that I got when I saw this the first second. Now, I'm sure you know, I've been a fan of Z cars for as long as I can remember, and I can't stop sketching these cars. And the reason for it is very simple. It's because of the simplicity of the car, the proportions, and this timeless elegance and that legendary sloping roofline that looks as if it's been cut by a katana sword at the end. If you were to strip away the status symbols, the badges and the logos, and have them all be in the same gray tone as static sculptures next to each other, to me the 240Z is in the same league when it comes to pure beauty as the Toyota 2000 GT and even the Ferrari 250 GTO. There are very few cars I love the shape more of than the 240Z, and one of them being the Ferrari 275 GTB, but that also costs about $1 million times more. And of course, if you're a big Z fan like me, get yourself one of these t-shirts in the description below. Before I start talking about the design here, I really want to thank Nissan for doing this 240Z inspired concept. They say it's a concept, but it's production ready. It looks production ready to me. The interior looks like it could be launched in any new Nissan models today, and I feel the same with the exterior. So what I think Nissan is doing here is they're kind of testing the waters. They call it a concept. It's basically the production ready car, but they want to get a vibe of the design. They want to get a feeling and some feedback and impact from its core Z buyers, especially their opinions about this car. They could have done something really boring, something mainstream, and something that would please the masses. That's what everybody does today, and even though if they bring back an old nameplate, they usually turn it into something very boring and mainstream. We've seen this over and over. But this car, and for example the Ford Bronco, is another good example of this. It just makes me excited, and it looked in the beginning of the development stages of this new Z here that they were going to go for something more mainstream and boring, like a slightly tweaked 370Z, and I'm really happy that they did not take that approach and instead went back and took away instead of added, which I think is, as I've said several times on this channel, which I think is going to be the way ahead, and we're starting to see that more and more now. Companies taking away from the styling instead of keep adding lines and features and curvatures to try to separate them apart, but instead what they end up with is just a mix of a bunch of lines that doesn't make sense. And this is a brave move by Nissan to intentionally and officially say that this car was inspired by a legend such as the 240Z. I absolutely love the fact that they went ahead with this approach, because if you think about it, would you rather be remembered for being unique and different than for being someone trying to fit in and be exactly like everybody else? Playing it safe is boring, and this is exactly what we need in the car design world today, and it's exciting. So my point here is that this approach by Nissan, it should be celebrated no matter what your personal opinion of this design is. And yes, there are a square or two that needs a little molding to them to better integrate in the overall styling, in my opinion, and that's what we're gonna talk more about in just a minute here. I quickly want to touch on some of the spec and tech here before we do go into the Photoshop and the design of this new Z concept, because most of it will actually go into the production 400Z, which I think is going to be called. So we have a twin turbo V6 engine, and you can have it with a 6-speed manual, fantastic, or a 7-speed automatic, and both of these have been confirmed for the production by Nissan themselves. It's likely that the power output will land somewhere between 350 to 400 horsepower, with a price in the mid 40,000 range when it arrives in the showrooms sometimes next year. And that's all I'm going to say about the spec and tech, because now let's talk about the big square in the room. Alright guys, so here we are, of course, inside of Photoshop, and this is the view that I want to talk about in this redesign. This is where I think most of the questions come up when you look at the overall design of this Z concept here. But first, let's have a look at the original, and let's have a look at just how much carried over to this concept here. And I think it's such a good job overall by Nissan to make this design here, although there are a few things in the front that doesn't really work, and I'm going to show you exactly why right now. So this is, of course, the original 240Z here. Absolutely beautiful car. If you look at the front here, you can see that we have a very, very static, squarish looking front intake here, which you can see right here. And this is what they did on the modernization here. It's basically the same shape. So why doesn't it work on the new shape when it works fantastically on the original? Whether it's a pretty simple answer to this, and there are two reasons why this works in the original here and doesn't work really as well in the new one. And the first one is, first of all, we have a bumper here, and this bumper, what this does, it separates this whole big square. It turns it into two vents instead of one. You have the larger one up here, which is the main vent, and you have the lower one under here, which is the kind of a secondary vent. Even though it belongs to the same air intake, it's divided visually by this chrome bumper here. For example, if I were to remove this bumper, let's just make a little bit of an experiment here. Let's say I were to remove this bumper here, and let's see how weird or how good this is going to look. So let's just fill this out like this. And you can see that it's starting to look more like the modern redesign that we have here, and it's starting to not look as good as if you were to have something that breaks this shape up. Another reason why it really doesn't work as well on the new version is back in the day, back in the 60s and 70s, when they created cars like this, they were allowed to have front ends that looked like this right here, almost like the profile of a wing of an airplane, something like this. But you can't really have this shape in side view. If you look at this car in side view, it would look something like this. You have nothing that connects the front end to the ground here, and that doesn't work today, mostly because of aerodynamic features. It's a lot of regulations that you need to abide by today that weren't really necessary to do back in the day. So today we can't create a new car that doesn't have something here that connects the front end to the ground to remove this airflow that goes in under the car here. And if you have a sports car, which the 400Z obviously is, it's going to be a problem, because if you go in, let's say, 155 miles per hour, air under here can create some lift, and that's not gonna work in a modern car. So that's another reason why this front graphics of the new concept isn't really working as well, because we need to stretch it all the way down to this ground, right to this point, almost down to the ground, and it just becomes too big. Now there is a third reason why it really doesn't fit in this design, and that is simply because it doesn't flow with the rest of the car. It's literally a square if you look at it from a straight front view. It's a rectangle with the same kind of radiuses on each corner, and it lacks something. It needs something added to it. It needs a little bit more styling to it, but nothing major, and that's what I'm gonna do here in just a second. But first, let's have a look at some of the really cool stuff or features that carried over to this concept. I talked about perception earlier in the beginning of this video, and the thing is, this car has already started growing on me. I kinda like this treatment now. I would say if I wait a week and if I see this car out on the streets, I think that first initial impression would slowly fade away and I would start to really like this design. But I'm gonna stick with my first impression here. It's always the purest impressions. I want to see if we can do something about the front grille here, and just some tiny changes in a bit to kind of integrate it better in the car. But here we have one of my favorite features, is this hood, which you can clearly see is a feature that was on the original 240Z as well. This to me is one of the coolest new hood designs that I've seen in a long time. I also really like the headlights. I think this is a perfect example of a modernized version of the original one, specifically since you have this area right here. If we zoom into this area, this is almost exactly the same as the original. We have a weird little curvature dip here. It looks like the original 240Z, and it looks like a modern interpretation of it because this is more streamlined. It doesn't go as deep as the original 240, and it just creates a cool feeling, and you can definitely tell that that's where the inspiration comes from. So looking at the rear here, we have a lot of 300ZX inspirations in the taillights right here. I have absolutely nothing to say about this rear end. I think it's a great looking car. It's not really beautiful, but it's just cool. It just has a cool vibe about it. And if we look at these cars from side to side, the old one and the new one, I'm going to show you a really cool play with graphic designs and how much graphic design really matters in car designs, how you can create an effect and a desired effect by using graphic design only. So look at the rear here. This is what I'm talking about. When I first talked about the front view, we can't create this anymore. We can't have a front that looks like this. We need to have it be stretched down to the bottom right there. But what about the rear? Can we do something like this in the rear and not have it be straight like this? Yes, we have more freedom to do that in modern cars, to have this slope right here than we have in the front. So what Nissan did here is they created this black part is actually a part of the car, but they made it black, and it's such a huge contrast to the yellow color of the car. So in this specific picture, you can't really tell that there is any body of the car in this area. And of course, they decided to have a black background to have this stand out even more, or stand out less, because it totally melts into the background and it gives it this sloping feeling that is reminiscent of the 240Z from the past. But my favorite viewpoint of the new Z concept is this view right here. This is a beautiful car. It has all the right ingredients from the 240Z. I honestly think it's a perfect, almost perfect modernization of the 240Z. The most important feature of this car is in this area right here, and of course the sharp corner up here that dips down and never goes back up. That's one of the most important lines of the 240Z, and I'm really glad that they took that inspiration from the 240 and not the 350, for example, which has a bit of a trunk in the back here. So I want to show you the 370Z here and why this treatment of the front works on this car, but it doesn't work on the concept. Well, the thing is, here we have different radius. We have some styling features in this front bumper. You have a smooth radius right here, up here, that goes kind of down and just crashes into this front lip here. It works because the 370Z has more of a fluid body lines, and it's a little bit more melted, and the front end, the front intake has those radiuses that is congruent with the rest of the body style. Same thing with the Nismo here. They changed a little bit, but they still have features from the outside of the grille or of the air intake go in to this car, and this creates some connectivity with the rest of the car. And of course, this is not a rectangle anymore. You have a lot of styling going on here compared to the concept that we have here. And then we have the 350Z, which looks almost like this new concept in the front if you're looking only at the front air intake here. It's a very static looking design here. There are no angles or curvatures. We do have a couple of radiuses up here, but this is just straight lines all over, and it works because same thing with the 370Z, it's congruent with the rest of the car, and the 350Z is a lot more static, a lot more straight lines than the more soft looking 370Z. So this air intake is also congruent with the 350, just as this style is congruent with the 370. So with that said, what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna just experiment a little bit here and try to figure out what this needs to be integrated better in the front end of this car. I don't think it's going to need much. It's just going to be a tiny, maybe a couple of changes or something like that. But let's have some fun, and then I'm gonna come back, of course, at the end of the video to show you what I did and why I did it. So during this sketch process here, you're gonna see two different designs. The first one is the one I'm doing right here, but when I came to an end of this design, I felt that it wasn't true to the original concept, so I decided to start over again and bring it back a notch and just try to be as close to the original as possible with minimal changes to the design. So there we have it, just a tiny few changes to this front end. I think it makes a bit of a difference because I think the original here, it doesn't really look finished. And what I mean by that is specifically around these areas right here, the dips here, it looks like something should be there because it looks like the shape of the bumper was molded or manufactured to accommodate something here. So this is one of these details that makes the front bumper look like it's a bit unfinished. And also I added these radiuses here. I made them more smooth because I think it suits the overall shape of the car. And if you look at this radius right here now, it's closer to this radius that you have here. So we have more of softer radiuses that you can connect to each other in the front. And the reason why I created a triangle here is because of the chiseled roofline of the 240Z and this one, this concept as well. It has almost a triangle like this if you look at it from a side profile. So that also, in my opinion, would suit the front graphics here. But, you know, my final thoughts on this concept here is I'm just happy to see cars like this being even considered today. I think it's, as I said, I think it's a really cool idea from Nissan to bring this back, and I think it's really brave of them to, as I said, officially have it be inspired by the previous generations of Z's, and more so the older one than the newer one. And I'm really glad that they made this decision to go ahead with this. And I hope this is what the production version is going to look like, even though I would maybe like to see a few changes to the front bumper here. But there's so tiny changes that I really don't mind. The original one, if this is exactly what the production is going to look like, I'm going to be very happy, and I'm going to be very excited when I see this out on the streets. Thank you so much for watching. I'm TheSketchMonkey. Take care, and I will see you in the next video.